I appreciate it. You guys go ahead and keep eating. I know that you have to get back to your jobs, and I promise that I will not keep you all afternoon. So I had originally been asked by Jim Wanzerski to come and talk with you all about the professional development side of using assessments. And I think it is because I guess a couple of months ago, you heard what executive recruiters are looking for when they're actually trying to conduct a search. And then I think you also had social media people, somebody that came and talked to you about how do you brand yourself and market yourself. And so I am going to talk about what you don't know about assessments may actually cost you. Personal development. I'm going to focus the majority of the presentation on the personal development piece of using assessments. And what I've done is at the end, if we've got a few minutes, I'll talk about how you can use them for hiring, developing a team, putting a team together, and a variety of other things. But for the majority of the presentation, I really wanted to focus on the personal and professional development, because I hear periodically executives say to me, well, I already know everything. I'm in my job. I'm the CEO. I'm the CFO. I don't really need to know any more than I know. But the world changes pretty quickly today. So I think that if you can stay up on your skills, and you never know, your company's going to get bought. It's going to get bought by, and then it'll get bought by another company. I mean, you just don't know, right? Nobody knows. So a quick story about assessments. When I worked at Ernst & Young, did anybody here work at EY back in the day? So back in the day when they were called EY, I had that was when assessments were just starting to become kind of big in organizations using them. So I had the manager that I reported to at the time did the assessment. We all did these assessments, and then we got our results, but we never got any feedback on these results. So now I'm going to fast forward years later. I've left E&Y, and it's the late 90s, and I've gone to Anderson Consulting. I have a team of people working for me, and it was probably about 6 months into working with this team, I had one of my team members come up to me and say, I used to be really afraid of you. And I said, well, help me understand that, because I really am not, I wasn't an ogre, etc. And what I realized is my mode or my behavioral style was every morning to come in and thinking about all the things that we needed to get done, and instead of coming in and asking how people's weekend was, or asking how their night was, or how their family was, I jumped right into, okay, I put myself down, all right team, we have to get on this, because we had deadlines to meet. So thinking back and connecting the dots, at the time when I worked at EY, had they actually shared information about what the assessment did, how your style differed from other people's styles, I might have been able to have a better initial interaction with my team. Now, eventually they all realized I wasn't an ogre and all of that, but it just shows you that you can't take an assessment and then not get feedback. It's like a doctor giving you a prescription, and he or she doesn't even know what's wrong with you. So these things have to be put in context, and they're helpful. I've given everybody handouts. So I haven't copied all the slides, but I have given everybody handouts of these. And so when you talk about assessments, some people say, all right, is it magic, is it art, is it science? And what I'm going to tell you is that it's science. And one question that I'd like to ask is, if you had a way that you knew that you could know more about yourself and have better interactions with the people you live with, the people you work with, I mean, wouldn't you want to know what that was? Wouldn't you want to be able to use that and have better interactions, less communication breakdown, that sort of thing? So that's what I'm talking about, and we call it the science of self. And I've got a copy. You're not going to be able to read these. That's why I made the handouts. But so the science of self. So this is one of the assessments that I use in my business with companies. And the more we know about ourselves, the more we can have better interactions. You can become a little more empathetic to the plight of, what other people are, other people's styles. So one question that I have is, has anybody in here ever gone through some sort of change within their organization? So it's either you have a new CEO coming in, or you've worked with a new CEO, or now you've got new people on your team, that sort of thing. If you used assessments can help you figure out who in the organization or on your team is going to stonewall the change, or be really interested and very quickly adapt to the change, and help the rest of the team adapt to the change as well. The other thing to know is that this particular assessment is backed by 30 years of research, recently brain science, and 4 patents. So validated and have validity studies and all of the other pertinent data that I know CFOs would be interested in. A lot of data. I just don't want to bore you with all the data. So here we're talking about competencies. If you look at the next slide, and I will tell you that somebody in your group who is not here, this is actually their profile. So what I want to do is, it's nobody in this room, so we can talk freely and openly. And I will not name names until at the very end. But what happens is, if you look at this, if you look at the competencies here, when you take this assessment, it actually shows you what your top, so you're most developed, you're somewhat developed, you're moderately developed, and needs development. And this information could be very helpful if you're interviewing for a job. Don't you think it would be helpful to know what the job competencies are and your competencies, and then you go to interview for the job, and now you're able, in your interview, to have a conversation with the person that's interviewing you and tie all those pieces together and show how you have demonstrated you have this competency, you know that the job needs X, Y, and Z competencies. So that's one thing to know. When I have clients that use this assessment for developing their people, this helps them see where within that individual's role they've really mastered certain things. And then if the individual wants to be promoted, places where they may have gaps. You're going to use it for hiring. I have other clients that benchmark their job, and then what happens is we know where the individual meets the competency, where they exceed the competency, or they fall short of the competency. Now you're making a conscious decision on hiring somebody, as opposed to just a resume or just interviews where everybody asks the question, so tell me about yourself. So anyway, so that's a little bit about the competencies or the personal skills. So in this particular screenshot, we're talking about behaviors and motivators. Motivators are the things that get us out of bed in the morning. And, we all get out of bed and go to work for certain places, certain companies, certain people, but for certain reasons that are really selfish to us. And that's okay. That's the way it's supposed to be. So what I would tell you is this individual, looking at their behavioral style and their motivators, if my client was hiring this individual, what I would say is, so you need to know that XYZ individual, we'll just say, I don't want to use Joe because I know there's a Joe in here, Dave, or somebody else, but what you need to know about Joe is that he has a very dominant personality style. His dominance factor is at 86, and so you need to know that he's going to be very direct. He's going to be borderline assertive, somewhat aggressive, depending on the situation. And with his influence factor at 68, what that tells me is that he can interact and work with a lot of different people. His steadiness factor is at 12, so that tells me he likes change, very fast paced. That's what happens when you have a high dominance. And then when people are interviewing, I never talk about the adapted style because everybody's always adapting their style when they're interviewing. But this individual on the natural style, with his compliance at 35, what I would say is sometimes he likes to think outside the box and he's not going to always follow the rules that you have set down. So you just need to give him the parameters and he'll work around those. But if my client were using this as a development tool, what I would say is, so the natural style for this person on compliance is to really not follow the rules. But their adapted style is above the energy line. So now what they're doing is they're making sure that whatever important information, they may not do it 24/7, but whatever important information they need to be focused on, they're going to make sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, right? So anyway, so that just gives you a little flavor for that. Now this individual happens to have their dominant motivator is individualistic. So what that says to me is they like leadership opportunities. They want to control their own destiny. They want to, it even borderlines on the political side of things, if you will. So we could, if you were looking at several of the candidates, so we'll take Donald Trump. Donald Trump probably has a really high individualistic. Control their own destiny, don't want people telling them what to do. A lot of salespeople have high individualistics. This person also has their second dominant motivator is traditional. So what that says to me is they have a system for living. So it's probably somebody that has a lot of integrity, probably very trustworthy. They, sort of the system for living could be the golden rule. I, will do unto others as I want to have done unto me. So it could be as simple as that. And then their third dominant motivator is utilitarian. So they're all about show me the money and using their resources and time wisely. So this is a way that I help my clients put into context how this person's going to show up if they decide they're interviewing them or they're going to hire them, or if it's somebody that it's one of their direct reports. Now we're going to talk about the driving forces. These are the motivators, but they're expanded. So now what you can see is for the individual we just talked about, AKA Joe, for this particular talk, is that from a theoretical standpoint, well, let's just talk about their top three. So they were, you saw individualistic. If you look down here at the bottom, they're a 90 on the commanding style versus collaborative. So what this says to me is, if you need this person to be a team player, you're going to have a little bit of selling to do. If you need them to work with the team, because what they want to do is they want to run it. They want to run the team. They want to be it. They want to own it. The individual is, if you look at traditional, receptive versus structured. So they're more structured in how they approach their work, their life, their like business problems. They might go to more structured, tried and true solutions for a business problem, versus receptive means, hey, I'm open to trying new things out of the box, to solve problems. And then you can also see on their utilitarian, they're more on the resourceful side versus the selfless side. And selfless really means if the person were more selfless, they're probably going to have a high social, which means they want to help other people regardless of how much time, money, or resources it takes. So that just gives you an additional bit of information about what shows up on some of these assessments. Any questions? I didn't even say, like, I am fine if you guys want to interrupt in the middle. I don't have any problem with that. If you've got any questions, if anything looks interesting, or you just have a comment.
Objective or motives?
Objective. Objective means I can compartmentalize things. Harmonious means, if, I'll use this as an example, I have clients that have open office spaces. Several people that they, one client in particular that has hired some people, these individuals have been more on the harmonious side. That's been their stronger scale on the scale. And what happens to somebody that is more harmonious, if they're concentrating on their job and they're sitting at their desk and it's an open space, but down the hallway they hear some people fighting or talking loudly or in like some kind of heated argument, or what's going to happen to the person that really likes harmony, they're going to stop. It's going to distract them. They can't really compartmentalize. Everything sort of bleeds over. So it's their life, work-life balance, harmony, nature. That's what really somebody that's really focused on the harmonious side. If you're objective, then if you hear people over there yelling and screaming, you're just thinking about your work, because you're thinking, they're just doing something. If it involves me, they'll come over and they'll ask me, or they'll interrupt me. But if it doesn't involve me, I don't have any problem with this. It also means that they can compartmentalize their life, so, and situations. So let's just say that somebody questioned their work or gave them, said their work was less than stellar or something. They would compartmentalize that, and they would say, okay, so now maybe the next time that Joe approaches me, I will, or ask me to do something, I'll operate in a different way. So, but they won't go around saying, well, everybody thinks that my work is horrible. They'll compartmentalize it to that one particular person. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Does that help?
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions about that? It just takes the 12 motivators and it really expands them so that you really understand which side of the equation, from an individualistic standpoint, a person would fall out. Are they more collaborative, or are they more commanding? And if you're going to hire somebody that's going to be an employee of yours, you might want somebody that's maybe less commanding, because they might be easier to manage. Just depends on what the situation is. But if you're hiring salespeople, you want somebody that has a high individualistic, because you want them to go out there and sell as much as they can for the organization. So there are some interesting nuances in roles, and which styles are really sort of match up different roles. Acumen. If you want to go to Acumen, one of the things that this particular assessment shows is, what is somebody's ability to, capacity for problem solving? What's their overall acumen capacity? And every job, has a certain need for certain skills or certain problem solving skills. And in this particular case, this person is well developed in their capacity for discerning individuality in others. The same thing with practical situations, systems in order, and then the distinction index is sort of their worldview and their personal view of how all these things lined up. So this person has quite high acumen capacity. And then when you look at their capacity for problem solving, you will see how do they handle individual situations versus complex situations versus theoretical situations versus problem and decisions. The decision index, and then their reaction index. And the reaction index is quite interesting. I have a client who's a CEO, and he originally hired a salesperson by having. He originally hired a VP of sales by having his head shrunk. That's the best way I can explain it. He actually spent a lot of money, thousands of dollars, to send this person to sit down with a psychiatrist and psychologist and go through interviews and some other testing and that sort of thing. And he hired that individual, and then that individual did not get his team together, and they didn't get any sales on the books for 2 years. So when the CFO, whom I have a relationship with, went to the CEO, she said, well, we're using these assessments to hire everybody else. Why don't you use this assessment to hire this other person? Well, before he wanted to do that, he said, well, I want to try the assessment. He tried the assessment, and when I sat down with him, he said, so how do you know I'm corrective? I said, you filled out the assessment. And it was hilarious because everybody, he was just impressed that it really nailed him. So they can, if you don't try to game the system, which you can't, and you really are interested in getting the real information about who you are, you'll get really good information. So I always thought that was really funny because the rest of the organization knew he was very corrective because he corrected them all the time. Any questions about Acumen or the assessments right now?
What's the difference between worldview and self-view?
The worldview is how do I view myself within the world. So it's more of an external view. How do I view my relationships with other people, how do I, what do I think about tasks, what do I think about just systems from an external standpoint. The other self-view is internally, so it would be my sense of self, my self-direction, and my role awareness, because we all have different roles that we play. We're husbands, daughters, moms, sisters, brothers, uncles, nieces, nephews. We have all these different roles within our families that we play. And what's really interesting about the role awareness piece is in this particular report, there's a capacity where people have they have clarity. So they either have really high clarity on these different things, or they have really low clarity. And a lot of times when people are in a job transition, they will have low clarity on their role awareness because they're open to job change, or they're not happy with the situation that they're in right now. And sometimes if it's extremely low, it could be that maybe they have maybe there's an illness in their family, or they've got some personal things going on. So the instruments are very sensitive and pick up a lot of really good information. And so if you're trying to develop yourself or develop your team, these are all really good things as a manager or a team leader. It's really good to know, because sometimes your people will come to you, they don't feel comfortable coming to you and telling you that they're having a little bit of a personal issue, or life is a little rough at home. And you all work in the financial services, CFOs, financial services. These are stressful jobs. Accounting teams are under a lot of stress these days. So these things can help give you information. Does that help with the worldview? Any other questions on that? And then I wanted to let you all know this is this is based on some work that a colleague of mine has done, and these are what he and his organization have come up with, the top 12 leadership competencies. And I thought you might be interested to see this, and I would just say, do you know how you stack up? Are you, or how you rate on each of these? But I thought from a personal development standpoint, you all might be interested in seeing maybe some recent research. And this was done by Ron Price Associates, and he also has a book out about developing these leadership competencies. And he did this a lot from some of the mid-level managers that they do coaching on, and so they've been helping them continue to learn and grow. So, how are we on time? We got just a little bit. Okay. So I briefly talked about using assessments for hiring. But before I go here, are there any other questions about the personal development piece? I know that that's really where Jim Wanzurski thought that I should spend most of the time. So so I wanted to make sure.
So those,
everybody-
were those different assessments, talking about Acumen, talking about?
That's all in one
That's all in
assessment.
one
That's
assessment.
all in
Okay,
one
so all those
assessment.
different things
Yeah.
are for the one assessment.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. It's all in one
And that's the science of
assessment.
self-assessment? is it?
Correct. Yeah, I call it the science of self. It's actually the Trimetrics HD
Okay.
yeah, assessment. That's,
Gotcha.
yeah, that I'm certified in. But, so any other questions about assessment?
Another question.
Okay.
You mentioned that people can't game the system. When I have done those tests before though, I always feel like I'm doing it from the perspective of my role in the company and that greatly influences the answers that I'm getting.
It does.
So how, I mean, and a lot of times I'll read it and I'm like, oh yeah, that's exactly, I can do that at work, but that's
Yeah.
not who I really am.
Right. You don't think that's who you, it's how you operate in your job.
I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's how
I mean,
you
it
operate.
feels like I'm cheating because I'm thinking of
You
it
feel like
the
you're gaming the system.
Yeah, because it feels like I'm doing it from my
No,
perspective.
absolutely. The way the questions are, and there are several, in this Trimetrics, there are several different sections. And the way the questions are asked, they're asked in a way, and one of the sections I'm thinking of specifically is asked in a way where it's specifically, because these can be job related, right? So if you're trying to develop yourself personally, or you've got a team that you're trying to develop, then you are going to want to know from a job perspective what their development opportunities might be. So you're answering the questions the right way. Now, you might have some adapted styles, or which you wouldn't really talk about unless it was more in a development situation, right? So if you're trying to, if a company's using these and you're going to be hired, they're going to look at your natural style. They're going to say she's got the ability to do this role based on these things right here, based on what the competencies are for the specific job. And where the personal part comes in, if you're thinking that it may not reflect you from a personal standpoint, that's going to be more the motivator piece, because there might be in your motivators something that you may be working in a specific place for a very specific reason, and that feeds part of your motivators, but then you've got your personal life, and you might have another motivator you don't even use in your job. And so that's where you could say the personal part comes in, but that has nothing to do with your job. Does that make sense?
It just feels like, I'm sure I'm smarter than everybody else that takes this test. But it feels like I'm kind of gaming it,
But you're
Well, I
not.
know this is what they want to hear.
Yeah.
I know this is what they want. This is what they're looking for.
Interesting. That's interesting.
So,
But what's the fascinating thing about this particular instrument is some of the questions are asked in such a way, and the same question is asked in about 4 or 5 different ways.
right.
So I don't know which assessment you're talking about, but I can tell you on this particular assessment, if that were the case, you might come across as the profile that we call postal. And that would be a whole different story that we need to have with your boss. Fair? So, anyway, but any other questions about that? Because I'm going to give you guys an opportunity. I've set up a link for this group if you want to try it. Free of charge. With a debrief, I'm not going to just give you a prescription and say, hey, go on your way. It has to be put in context. It really has to be put in context. But what I like about this particular, the specific system that I use with my clients, and I work mostly with clients who have less than 100 people right now. That just happens to be my client base. But when they're hiring, normally what they do is, there are a certain number of job classifications, right? And they may be hiring for, salespeople may be one, client service people may be another, and technology people, for this one client I'm thinking about, is another one. And so what they've done for each of their job classifications is they've benchmarked their jobs. And so they know for a a technology person, what those top, for their company, what the top competencies, motivators, behaviors, acumen are for that role. And this is really key because everybody's, people are getting really good at interviewing. I don't know if you've noticed that. They're really good at interviewing. They're getting a lot of practice. A lot of companies are doing behavioral interviewing, which I highly recommend. Still a great way to get a lot of really good data. But if you want other data and you want to get behind the scenes data, as I like to call it, then using what I call the unbiased hiring process of having a job benchmark and then assessing your candidate against your job benchmark, you can clearly see, and you'll see here on the, on the handout, you'll see where the job competency is. The person is the dot and the circle is the job. And you see where the person meets the job, falls outside the job, clearly exceeds it, or doesn't even come near it. But then you can make a conscious hiring decision. Maybe you've got two people that are, pretty close. Maybe they both have the same financial, similar backgrounds, similar years of experience. But then when you get this information, it tells you, well, one is clearly a better candidate, even though maybe they're not in your industry. Maybe they're outside your industry. So this helps you, I like to call this the unbiased hiring process. Because we all have, unfortunately, we all have those biases. We like the people that went to the same school that we went to, or it's people that go, our kids go to school with or whatever. It's just a natural human thing that we do. We like certain people and we think, other people that went to other schools that were not as good as our school are not as good as us. So, so that's the way this process works. And I'll give you a little bit of, because I've got just a few more minutes here. I have a client out of a small consulting firm out of North Carolina. They do not hire experienced people. They only hire off campus. They are right in the Raleigh-Durham area, and there's some very good schools around there that they were going to. Healthcare consulting. So they were going to Chapel Hill, they were going to Duke, and they were hiring these extremely competent MBA students. And what they found after about 2 years of hiring people, training them, and then having these people leave at the end of the year, something was broken because they were spending a lot of money hiring people that were not staying around. And they were spending a lot of money hiring, they were spending a lot of money the training and just getting them up to speed to start working with clients. And so they called me in, we benchmarked their job, and they ended up saving in their, after their, first year of round of hiring, where at the end of the year, everybody was still there, they ended up saving about $500,000. And this is a small firm of, less than 100 people. So these things really work, and they can add real numbers and hard numbers to your bottom line. And then, any questions about using this for hiring or developing team or any of that kind of thing? The only thing I just want to quickly touch on here, I call it the $1 million plus case, because we don't really know, we're not really sure how much it's going to be. But I've been called to be an expert witness for a hospital system out of the Northeast, and they had used one of these assessments, but not the full-blown assessment. I always recommend that if you're going to use assessments, that you really benchmark your job, especially if you're over 50 people. If you don't have a benchmark, you open yourself up, and you're using assessments. Even though these assessments are validated, you start to open yourself up to a lot of EEOC, OFCCP audits. And let me tell you, if you work for a smaller company, they're starting to come after the smaller companies, because the big companies have mostly gotten smart. Target just had a $2.8 million issue with using assessment, just letting their managers just willy-nilly use any assessment. So anyway, the $2.8 million settlement. I don't know a lot of companies that can handle it, but Target, I guess, can handle it, losing $2.8 million. This particular situation, the person was specifically hired for their background. you know, we saw earlier, the person that had the high dominance, that's a change agent. That's somebody that wants to get in, and so they hired this, the CEO hired this person as a COO, definitely wanted somebody that was gonna come in, didn't care that they were gonna ruffle feathers, that was the whole point. We're trying to make some changes here. 2 years go by, and now the person the COO that was hired has asked the CEO to fire one specific person, and the CEO had already made all these changes that this individual wanted, and that was all good. But in this one, he just didn't agree. He said, no, we're not gonna fire that person. I think it was the chief of staff or something. And this person got in a huff. That's their behavioral style. When put under pressure, you will go to your natural behavioral style, whether it's you know, going into your room and closing the door, going to your office and closing the door, or, you know, lashing out at people. This particular person happened to lash out. And not only did they lash out, they walked out the door and basically abandoned their job. So after not hearing from the person for a couple of days, they terminated her. I mean, she's left the company. If you abandon your job, what are you supposed to do? And now she has brought a lawsuit against the hospital. So it's going to be interesting to see where it goes, because if they had a job benchmark, there would be no question. There would be like, yeah, the courts would say, yeah, we see where your job benchmark says all this, and we see where that person has all this, and this is a crazy lawsuit. You know, so.
Is there something that helps you benchmark specific jobs? How do you go about doing?
Yeah, well, there's actually a process that I use
Okay.
that can help you benchmark. And I don't recommend you benchmark every single job. I just recommend you benchmark key jobs where it's either a really key important role, or if you have, you know, salespeople, or if you're hiring, let's just say you're hiring accounting people, but they're all pretty much going to do the same thing. The only time you would benchmark something separately is if one accounting person one group is doing something completely different than another one. Then you would want two benchmarks, just to cover yourself, and just to make sure that you're getting the best match for you. Because what these assessments do is also not only give you this additional data, but it helps you make sure that this person is going to be a good match and a good fit for your organization. Cultural-wise.
Are you finding that there are differences generationally with how people take and perform in these tests? So, for example, at our company, we have a lot of millennials, and I can see that they would answer things in a way that they do things differently than the rest of the people.
Yeah.
Are you seeing generational differences?
Well, what I can tell you is we're not really seeing that much generational differences, but these assessments are consistently and constantly being updated, and the reliability testing and validity testing is continuously going on. And part of some of the changes that have been made over the last 5 years is language, because everybody's got a little bit of a different language. And these assessments can be taken in pretty much every single native language. And I always recommend, so if you've got somebody whose native language may not be English, they can just click on the assessment and they can pull it down the drop box. And if Spanish is really what they feel most comfortable with, they can take the assessment in Spanish. Because these assessments are used worldwide, not just U.S. based. Any other questions about hiring? Otherwise, I'm gonna move on. And so now you know about assessments. You can develop yourself personally, your team. If you're looking for a job interviewing, hiring, just about everything except helping you bake a cake or that kind of thing. Can even help you have better discussions with your family, your spouse sometimes. Any other questions that maybe I didn't cover? Things, burning questions, desires, things you want to know?
These things have been out forever, and over the 40-year career span I've had, I've probably went from one to the other, and I can't even remember all the names of them. One of the ones I took They had two, the same questions, you answered
Yeah.
them two different ways. One your natural, one your work style. I mean, and it was
Yeah.
like 100 questions.
Yeah.
I don't even remember the names of them.
Yeah.
Why is yours better? How's it different? What's the output? I mean, I'm definitely going to take it in the
Yeah.
next week or two because I always like to learn about myself. I know
Yeah.
I'm a traditionalist. That's what they call
Yeah.
it. Well, I account for traditionalist. You know, that personality type. But
I
tell
would
me-
not agree with that.
Well, I just said that's,
Yeah.
that a lot of
Yeah.
accountants have
Yeah.
that traditionalist
That's a
personality
bias.
model.
That's a bias that somebody has that told you that.
No, that's one of those personality tests I took probably
Oh, it said-
15 years
that's
ago.
funny.
Was
Yeah.
the model I
Yeah.
I'm definitely not a sales type.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah, that's okay, that's okay. I think we need everybody, but the 30 years of research, backed by brain science. Recently, this has been, and there's a patent on it, so there are 4 patents on these. And they are validated. This is the part that I think maybe the research for one, because every firm doesn't do
Is this a
research.
service that you utilize and you're the local person that does
No,
this?
I actually am a TTI Success Insights is the company that has all the backing. They've done all the research for the last 30 years.
So what's your relationship with them?
My relationship is I'm certified
Okay.
to sell their assessments and use them with my clients. And they make us get recertified every 2 years. So some places don't.
And the other problem I had with using these over the years, some of them give you way too much information.
Yes.
And they're an inch thick report that you can't
Yeah.
absorb.
Yeah.
And then some, there's a happy medium on
Yeah.
how much you want to know.
Translate that information.
Yeah, well, that's where the debrief comes in. Where the disservice comes in is when somebody gives you an assessment, just like I talked earlier in my career, when I went to E&Y, my manager had us take these, but nobody ever bothered to say, well, this is what this means, and this is how you and your teammates differ or are similar, or that sort of thing. And that's where the disservice comes in. Somebody has to put the information in context for you from a work perspective. So when I have clients that are using these to hire people, I will specifically say to them, you need to understand when this particular person is put under stress, they are going to go for your jugular. And if that is okay with you, then you should hire them. I mean, that's just going to be their natural style. Their natural style is to be assertive, bordering on aggressive. And so you have to you have to talk about it in context. But what's important, I think, for those of you that are consultants or in a job transition, that sort of thing, is the more you know about your own style and you start learning about reading other people's styles. This is what I teach salespeople, how to adapt their style when they're in a sales situation. So when you're because we're all salespeople, right? So you have a specific behavioral style, and I have a specific behavioral style. And when you and I sit down to, I've called you in to be to potentially help me or hire you to be my consultant. If my style is I want to have some chitty chat, interaction or whatever, and you immediately start in on data, you've lost me. This is where the important information comes in. This is why I'm so passionate about this. And the same thing with hiring people. If you bring somebody in, you want to understand how are our styles going to interact. And so I always recommend these can be used for hiring, onboarding. If you sat down, if you had a new hire, sit down with you in an onboarding, you come to agreement. This is my style. This is your style. Let's talk about how we're going to operate here. And then when you have your team do this, now everybody's starting to have some common language. And I think where a big disservice comes in is when you take an assessment, nobody puts it in context for you.
So you're able to take then the assessment, and most of us here are hiring managers, hire staff, we're all problem solvers. This is not our area of specialty, even though we all
Yeah.
understand something about it.
Yeah.
You're able to take the assessment and the job and look at those two together and say, this person in this job, here are strong points, weak points, or non-matches.
Right.
And that's something your debriefing process
Correct.
is able to do to make this effective.
Correct. And then I can also say, well, I know all the people on your team, and I know what their style is, and I know this person's style, and this is how the interaction's gonna happen. I know your team's motivators, I know this person's motivators, this is where there's gonna be good interaction, this is where there might be some, some dissent. Because everybody, until everybody understands, until I understand you, and you understand me, and we're working on a team together, until we really understand where we're coming from, we can't really appreciate one another, and we can't get our job done. I've done training sessions before where I've seen people come in like this, like just so upset, like, I know that, because they're like angry at the other part, and people are angry at each other. I mean, I don't know, maybe you guys have some teams like, you've seen it, different departments, yeah. And then you have them do these assessments and you start talking about these funny stories of, this style, because no style is bad and no style is good, everybody just is. Our styles are our styles, and we are who we are. So you just see the guard come down and the light bulbs start going off, and by the end of the session, these people are able to joke with one another and really interact and start to appreciate, okay, I have a style and you have a style, and we start to appreciate, you gotta have everybody on the team. You gotta have every style on the team, or you have a lopsided team. So, anyway.
Last question,
Oh,
because of the time, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. If people are interested, they want to learn more,
Yes.
or they want to take the next step,
yes.
what is it?
Next step. So if you want to learn more, I've given you in your handout, there is a link. Feel free to go on there, take it. I will call you. I will debrief your information. It's free to you. What I have found is that when people try these and they really understand how it works, they can start applying, like, oh, okay. And I always like to say, I solve the problems caused by the employee too valuable to fire. So if you have one of those employees that's driving you nuts, but they're awesome, yeah, I can help you with that
Love
too.
it.
So yeah, and I'm going to make sure that Lee has all the handout. I'm going to send her a copy of everything. So thank you. And any other questions, I'll be around afterwards.
Yeah, I do want to close the
Yeah,
just out of
okay.
respect for people's time. Vicki, thank you, we appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.